And even when they didn't wear it, it was important to have an armory that somebody could visit and also to be able to show high quality items that they owned. And so these armors didn't belong to the Count Strap, but come from the ancestors who died out in 1504, the bailiffs of Match. And you see this pointed nose, the visor that dates from basically what was the period of the 100 Years' War in France. But that was an international type of helmet that was worn in every conceivable part of Europe, at least of Western Europe, as far as England, Flanders, but also in Italy, in Central Europe. And it has the breastplate that is decorated with Latin bands with religious invocations. And every armor always had a talismanic quality. So they often have decorations that just showing piety, but also specifically referring to protection from above, from the heavens, that would add to comfort of the wearer. So this is a very unique armor for those features. It's possible that the helmet and the breastplate did not originally belong together, but the armor was a functional item, and it was often reworked, repaired, certain parts would be replaced. So it was very normal to have a suit that had a working life with some additions, some amendments, some repairs, some enhancements, and so forth. You see that actually there are several of these helmets, and incidentally, I should mention that we have one in the Philadelphia Museum of Art that came from a French collection that was formed in the early 1800s, that belonged to a man who invented the Gothic style of French literature, which is basically the equivalent of the Romantic literature in Britain, an equivalent of Walpole. But it's absolutely undecorated and has a more functional, utilitarian character. This is a very, very fine example. So
what's the date of that, Pierre?
Basically you can say it's some 1370 or so. I'm not going to do a grand history of armor, but armor basically starts with the classical antiquity, and there's a very long and complex trajectory starting with bronze and leather as a primary defense and later iron. The standard early medieval armor consists of mail, so this is the interlocking links, and this is a hauberk that is essentially intact. But armor was also worn with layers of other protective materials which have not survived, and sometimes also carried a shield which provided additional defense. By the late 15th century, the shield goes away. It almost disappears. Nobody's wearing a shield anymore. You wear the rigid plates that provide sufficient protection over the body, and the shield is only used in tournament as a target for the opponent, not on the field. So behind these very early armors, you have a very impressive row of armors from different workshops. The finest armors in Europe before 1500 roughly came all from Lombard. They were made either in Milan or in Brescia. There was some workshop in Florence, but they didn't have an international reach. And that has to do also with the Lombardian commerce. They were able to export and finance the production of large quantities of armor to be exported to England, as far as the Baltic and so forth. And the Italians did not just export armors, they exported also armors. So they had armors working in places like Lyon, Bordeaux, as far as Scotland. Some of them lived in Valenciennes, in Lille, in Brussels, in Bruges. You find some of them in Barcelona, in Portugal. And there was an international style. It was essentially Milanese in character. That was made in various parts of Europe by people who either had trained in Milan or were imitating the competition, the fierce competition of the Italians, and working in the same tradition. The German armors rose as very serious competitors over the course of the 15th century. And it was indispensable for a sovereign to have high quality armor, which he could import, but also to equip his troops. And in Innsbruck, not very far from here, where we're going to be tomorrow, there was the court of Archduke Sigmund of Tyrol, known as the Rich, but who actually was not so wealthy. And he surrounded himself with armors who lived in the nearby suburbs of Innsbruck called Mühlau. And those armors were making objects that not only were used to outfit himself for tournaments and war and his courtiers, but also presented as diplomatic gifts. Some to the King of Scotland, some were sent even to Hungary and Poland, so extremely prestigious recipients who could afford Milanese armors, but those objects that were made in nearby and sort of Upper Tyrol were competitive, they had the right quality. Among the greatest armors working there was a family called the Traits, Traits in German. And we believe that some of them actually came from Milan, because there was a Balzarino d'Atrezzo who was working for the King of France in Blois and then in Tours. And then you had other people with the same name with all armors and all with the Lombardian origin. So it's possible that the beginning of this German competition was actually fed with the Italian workmen. And it's not a coincidence it happened in Innsbruck, because we are in this cultural buffer between the Germany and Italy, and that was a perfect place to have not only a start in terms of finding the right workers, but also in terms of style. This is where a German style was blended with an Italian style, and the examples of that are all here. They have Italian features, but they have German marks, showing that essentially the Germans were initially copying Italian designs. And among the greatest examples is this one, which was made in Milan. It's missing the arms, but an armor so complete is an extraordinary rarity. It has plain features. When we looked at paintings, it was mentioning the sort of liquid nature of Italian armor, all simple, all fluid, all rounded, with limited ripples or flukes. And this, without the helmet, would be easily taken for an Italian armor if it didn't have the marks. This is a perfect Milanese armor signed. The Milanese armors tended to subcontract the work, so there would be somebody who would have the wherewithal to fund all the making of an armor, which was a very expensive proposition. And the different workmen